Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day to all our viewers across the globe and welcome to another fascinatingly thought-provoking and stimulating episode of Global Arena on my YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I'm your host, Umar Dandago. Well, my guest today is an expert and authority, famously prominent, not just in his oil-rich Gulf nation of Kuwait, but in the United Kingdom and in the United States of America as well. Fahed Al-Sumait is an associate professor of communication at American University of Kuwait. He is now on the show to talk us through a number of pressing issues regarding the media and politics in the Middle East. Well, a hugely significant region that has, for an extended period of time, been making lots of hard-hitting and, of course, attention-grabbing headlines for a number of reasons. For example, the so-called War on Terror, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the Arab Spring of 2011, and many more. Professor Al-Sumait has written and spoken extensively about the Arab democratization. And so we will debate in the course of the program on whether or not it is good to use the media in propagating democracy. Well, the million-dollar question we have here is, given the unstable consequences of the Arab Spring in countries like Libya and Syria, can we say that democracy is not the best system of government for the Arabs? Well, Fahed Al-Sumait, Associate Professor of Political Communication at American University of Kuwait, joins me right now via Zoom from Kuwait. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Nice introduction.
All right, it's a pleasure, of course, having you. And for the next 1 hour, we'll be interviewing Professor, and we'll be talking a lot about issues that have to do with the Middle East from a political and the media point of view. Well, before we dive deeply, Professor, into the crux of the discussion, I would like you to take us through a little bit of your biography for the sake of our viewers here in Nigeria and in other parts of the African continent.
Sure. So I guess I should start off by saying I'm mixed race. My mother's American, my father's Kuwaiti. And this has had a profound impact on the kind of things I study, on where I live, on the kinds of things that I find of interest. I grew up mainly in the United States and traveled back and forth to Kuwait for 20 years in the summers before I ended up moving here after taking an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Washington in Seattle. How much of the biography should I get into? So after living and working here for 6 years, not in journalism, but in public relations, as it turns out, then I went back to graduate school, did a master's degree at the University of New Mexico in intercultural communication. And then for my PhD, I went back to Seattle to the University of Washington to focus more on political communication. Following that, I had a Fulbright Hayes Fellowship to do my dissertation work on Arab democratization, and I did that field work here in Kuwait, and then did a postdoc fellowship at the National University of Singapore for a year before I returned back to Kuwait, where I've been ever since.
Yeah, of course. Do you have, I'm sorry, maybe it can sound a bit personal, but do you have any relationship with the Kuwaiti monarchy?
No relationship with the monarchy.
Okay, here in Nigeria, a lot of people have been speculating that one of the weapons that the Western world has used on the Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and so on and so forth, is that they married off their daughters, the Western guys, the Americans, the Brits, and so on and so forth. They married off their daughters to the princes of your countries, for example, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. Is that true that most of the princes that we have in the Gulf nations are married to Americans and the Brits and so on and so
forth? No, I don't think it's true. I mean, there are definitely people related to the royal families in the region who have married into American families as well. But I don't think it's a matter of political practice. I think it comes down to the individuals. Most of the people who've been involved in actually ruling in Kuwait, the UAE, etc., Saudi Arabia are not married to Westerners. I believe Sheikh Zayed was at one point. I'm not sure. But again, I don't think this is a political thing. I think this has more to do with the individuals. Often they'll study abroad and then they'll end up finding a spouse while they're studying, which is what happened to my father, coincidentally, which is why my mother's American.
Yeah. Yeah. So I that's why I put that question to you, because this is what a lot of people have been saying, including one rumor that has been circulating that Mohammed bin Salman's mother is Jewish American, not even Saudi.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, anything's possible, I guess, but it's not something I've seen as common knowledge or presented widely.
Okay, so how do you deal with the issue of religion? Did your father marry an American, like a Muslim American or Christian American, for example?
My mother converted to Islam before they got married. So I guess that's how the religion factored into it.
Very good. Congratulations, mashallah.
Okay.
So yeah, let's move away from personal lives. I know a lot of people don't like poking into their own personal lives. I mean, why did you decide to study media and communication? Why not law? Why not medicine? Why not any lucrative money-making courses that we have in the world? Was it even your own choice, or it was your parents that, well, forced you to study communication?
It was neither. Like many undergraduate students, when I started university, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I bounced around from major to major. I did political science for a little while, psychology, was interested in maybe going into chemistry at one point. But I was also trying to pursue a scholarship from the Kuwait government. And the first time that I applied for the scholarship, they had the only thing I saw that I was interested in was computer engineering. I tried that for a year and it didn't work very well. And so the next year I went back to the list of approved majors, and they had journalism on there. And journalism was something I was actually interested in. I'd always, been keen on writing. I see journalism as a very important social role. And so I ended up doing that. I didn't get the scholarship right away, but I did end up, no, that's all right. But I did end up studying journalism and quite enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, while I was a student studying journalism, my journalism focus was on print media. While I was a student studying that, I also ended up volunteering for a homeless newspaper in Seattle, writing stories, doing editing, looking at things like state policies and city policies and how they affected marginalized people. And I found that quite rewarding and very stimulating. There's always something to learn in journalism. So that's kind of how I got started. But when I moved back to Kuwait, the journalism training that I had is sort of English language print journalism. Did not fit well with the way that journalism was practiced in Kuwait. While the Arabic language journalism, especially in the printed press, is quite strong in Kuwait by regional standards. Writing in English, and especially in the English press, was not quite as valued. And so I ended up not working in journalism when I got here. As I mentioned, I I kind of went to the other side, as we saw it in journalism, and ended up working for PR, which as a journalist, people in PR are seen as sort of spin meisters and trying to influence the narrative. But actually, it worked out to be something quite good. I was working in petrochemicals. Had a chance to do a lot of environmental work while I was there on behalf of the company. Learned a lot, traveled a lot, enjoyed it a lot. But at the end of the day, making plastic look good wasn't really a calling that I felt strongly about. So I ended up going back to graduate school.
Yeah, of course. So I understand that you practice journalism for a short period of time in print media, contributing to that local newspaper in Seattle, and then you tried doing that in Kuwait. It didn't work out because there are no many English-based newspapers newspaper companies in Kuwait. Is it the case right now that English is not that popular in your country, or it was only a thing in the past?
Yeah. I mean, there were two pretty good English newspapers. They're still around, the Kuwait Times and the Arab Times in Kuwait, that are in English. And the Kuwait Times actually was the first English language daily in the Gulf region, as I understand it. But coming in as a Kuwaiti with a Western background, it was hard to be competitive with a lot of the kind of expats that were employed to work there. And at that time, the information environment wasn't quite as open as it is, I would say, now. I mean, sometimes it goes back and forth. But at the end of the day, the kind of stuff that they did there, the kind of stuff, I went to the Ministry of Information, looked at working there, but it wasn't the kind of more investigative style journalism I was used to. And, and there were certain red lines, and I didn't feel comfortable working in journalism where there might be red lines, because in the training that I got, there weren't really major red lines that you had to worry about. And that kind of freedom to investigate things like corruption and scandal, or even critique policies and things like that, it wasn't quite the same here, and so it didn't appeal.
Yeah, you said red line. What do you mean? You mean that the Kuwaiti monarchy exercises a great deal of, pressing and suppressive power on the press, for example? Is that what you're saying? And that's why you felt uncomfortable to practice the way you have been practicing in the United States?
Not exactly. I mean, when you look at the media environment in Kuwait, the policies surrounding the media are not things that are just a result of the royal family. I mean, Kuwait has a relatively active parliamentary system, and so they play a role as well in setting media policies. There is a bit of a balanced power here that you don't find so much in many other Arab countries. So it wasn't so much heavy censorship. It's more, there are regulations within the laws here about things and people that you can critique, that the idea of that alone was something that didn't really appeal to me. But actually, if you look at, for example, the Freedom House or Reporters Without Borders and the reports that they have, for as long as those records have been kept, Kuwait has the most free media environment in the Middle East. Hence why I'm not afraid to talk, for example, about topics like this on a YouTube channel. While there's been some degradation in media freedoms, any kind of new policy that comes out in Kuwait, there's one being debated now about new media laws, has to be debated publicly and through the parliament. And the parliament are elected in free and fair elections. And so it's not so much that the monarchy gets to dictate what kind of media policies they have. They can make recommendations for media policies, but they're not the only ones involved in the legislative process. So I think that the nature of Kuwait's sort of relatively open political environment is one in which media freedoms have been allowed to be exercised in a way that you don't see in many other countries of the region. And that's been, I think, something that Kuwait should be proud of. It was just different than the kind of stuff I was interested in. I was also interested in potentially working for an international organization as a foreign correspondent, but as a fresh graduate, that's also not a very realistic ambition, especially for a post in the Middle East, which tends to be, reserved for more senior correspondents and that sort of thing. So it wasn't so much that it was just, it wasn't a place where I wouldn't be able to practice journalism. It just wasn't the kind of place where I'd be able to practice the kind of journalism I had envisioned doing. And for me, that didn't work out. Now, if my Arabic was stronger, I probably could have practiced something closer to the type of journalism I had been trained on in the Arabic press in Kuwait, which was traditionally even stronger and more vocal than the English press. Because the Arabic language dailies are targeting mainly the local population, of citizens. Whereas the English papers are primarily focused on the expatriates that tend to live here. And so back to your original question, I mean, English is widely spoken in Kuwait. It's part of the reason why I struggle with my Arabic, because I can get by so well with English. So I
do you
guess
feel
that
uncomfortable? Yeah. Do you feel uncomfortable given the fact that you did not grow up in the Middle East, you grew up in the United States of America, and that corrupted your Arabic language, for example? Do you feel a little bit shy to tell people that you're an Arab, but you cannot speak Arabic fluently?
Whether I tell them or not, it's pretty apparent. I mean, I have an Arabic name and a family name that's well recognized in Kuwait as a Kuwaiti name. So it comes out whether I want it to come out or not. And, you know, after, I won't say how many decades, but many decades of being around, it's something I'm quite used to people raising the issue. But it's for me, in terms of my career and my ambitions, having a strong competency in the English language in a place where English is the second language for most people has been something that I've been able to use to my advantage. So yeah, in some ways it's certainly a disadvantage to not be more fluent in Arabic than I am, but there's also advantages to having strong English skills coupled with the nationality and with a deep understanding of the local cultural context.
Good. Let's move on to another important issue. Here in Nigeria, a lot of young people are battling between what they want to study and what their parents want to study. You told us earlier on in the beginning that you are at some point in time, you're thinking of studying chemistry, computer engineering, sociology, psychology, and so on and so forth. But then you ended up at the end studying mass communication, for example. In Nigeria here, some parents dictate to their children what they want them to study. And I believe it's the same case in India, where parents, if they give birth to a male child, they want him to be an engineer. If it is a female, they want her to be a medical doctor, for example, as we've seen in some of their movies. The same case in Nigeria also. Some people want their children to study medicine while the children want to study something else. In Kuwait, for example, do parents dictate to their children what to study or not?
I mean, I can't speak for the whole country, but what I see in terms of my experience in working in universities here, parents strongly suggest, of course, you know, things in the STEM areas, the science, the technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine. These are certainly ambitions that parents would like to see. But I think, you know, parents are one of many pressures on students to try and figure out what they want to study. And as part of the oil wealth distribution program that they have in Kuwait, the Kuwait government provides scholarships for students to study here and abroad if they're Kuwaiti. And by virtue of how the scholarship is established, students tend to have to select a major before they start university. And this can be problematic in some ways. One, it does make them more reliant on the advice of their parents and on counselors and others. Two, I mean, if you think about, you know, your average 17, 18-year-old in Kuwait, that many of them have not worked before, they're not sure what their ambitions are. There's an uncertain future in terms of where the country is going and where the jobs are needed. And maybe they have an education in their high school or earlier that doesn't necessarily give them a lot of guidance. So when it comes time to select a major, many of them will ask around and they'll pick something often prematurely without being able to do what I did, for example, and experiment with different majors. And then they get locked in because in order to then change from one major to the other, if they're on scholarship, they have to maintain a certain GPA, they have to have a relatively high GPA, and they have to have finished a certain amount of credits. And for students, for example, like if that would have been me studying computer engineering, my GPA wouldn't have been able to go up to a level where I'd be able to transition over to a different major. So students sometimes get locked in, I would say, by the system. And they're certainly influenced by parents, but they're also influenced by the scholarship programs, as I was. They're influenced by the
By their
universities and
friends.
by the friends. I mean, many people will just say, "Oh, I know someone who studied this. I'm going to study that same thing."
I
So I
was
think there's
also
a
a victim
whole,
of this.
yeah, yeah,
I was
okay,
also a victim of this, of course.
yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's. I mean, you seem to have stumbled on a major that you quite like. So maybe your friends gave you good advice. But you know, it's. I wouldn't say there's a countrywide systematic approach to parents pushing their kids into a major, but there's certainly preferences that parents have and institutional forces that often lead students to choose a major that maybe if they had more time to experiment with different subjects might not be the major that they settle on. But again, there are provisions to allow them to change, as I mentioned, and I see students do often change majors to things they would like. There's also, you know, a limited number of majors available in the country at the private universities, especially. So they also have limitations imposed on them by virtue of what's available. So I think it's a
Okay.
combination of all of these things that lead them to choose certain areas.
I understand that American University of Kuwait is a private university, right?
Yes.
What can you say briefly about the system of education that you have in Kuwait in general? Are the private universities better, more sophisticatedly equipped than the public universities, or is just the story is the same?
Better and worse is always a matter of opinion. So I couldn't really speak to that. I would say that in terms of resources, actually the state university has better resources. They have a new campus. They have a lot deeper funding. They offer a lot more majors. They offer more graduate degrees. So in general, the state university is well equipped in many ways, and it's been around much longer. It's been around since the 60s. The private universities in Kuwait have only been around since the early 2000s. So there's also, you know, kind of that institutional history. But the private universities tend to operate with a higher level of efficiency in many ways. And they don't have the same kind of resources, so they have to be more creative with how they do things. They're not as big in scale. I mean, for example, the university that I'm at now probably has somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 students. The state university is something like 35,000 students. So, you know, and just in terms of scale, it's hard to make comparisons, qualitative comparisons of better or worse. There will be some majors that are probably stronger in the private sector, and there'll be some majors that are not only stronger in the government sector or the government university, but also that are only available in the government university.
So which ones are more expensive, the public universities or the private universities?
The private universities, the public universities, for Kuwaitis, if they manage to get in because they have a higher entrance standard, the government pays for them. For many of the students, though, in the private universities, they also get scholarships, as I mentioned, where the bar is not quite as high as it is for entry into Kuwait University, the state university. I think if someone was to pay out of pocket to go to one or the other, it would cost them more to go to the private universities. But they're going to get a very dynamic education. I mean, for example, where I'm at is a liberal arts-based university. And so they're exposed to a lot more in terms of the foundational knowledge that they get than they are at, for example, Kuwait University. There's also a public authority for applied education and training here in Kuwait, which is even, I think, bigger than Kuwait University, that offers like 2-year associate style degrees. And they also have quite a wide range of things. And again, I believe the state covers the cost for a lot of the local citizens. But non-citizens, I believe, can also sign up.
I understand that a lot of Arabs, especially the young ones, are very much captivated by American life, Americanism in general. So they can be more interested to come to your university as you have an American style and as you expose them to the American system of education, and probably an opportunity to travel to the United States of America, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do have students that travel to like our sister university, which is Dartmouth in the United States, or students that will study their undergraduate degree with us and then look for an education, a graduate degree somewhere else. And I think one of the big advantages that the private universities do have is the private universities teach in English. And Kuwait University is a combination. Some majors have more English, depending, for example, if you study medicine, it's imperative that you do that in English, but they have many other degrees where it's in Arabic. So it also attracts students differently depending on what language of study they're interested in.
So if I were to come to Kuwait for my master's degree after I finish my undergraduate degree here, which university would you recommend for me to go to?
Well, your undergraduate degree is it journalism as well?
Yes, mass communication.
Yes. Yeah, mass comm. So you wouldn't have many choices because there aren't mass comm master's degrees in Kuwait. These have been proposed for a long time, both by the private university and the state university. But so far, the councils that regulate the approval of those haven't given the green light. So you wouldn't be able to, for example, get a master's degree in mass comm in Kuwait at the moment. And I think this is part of the reason why a lot of students that go, for example, to the private universities or even the public university, if they want to go on for further education, they have to go abroad.
Okay, yeah, I understand. But there must be some courses like public, what do you call it, PR, public relations, advertising, for example,
Yes,
and other money-making, lucrative courses that are under mass communication, for example, right?
Yeah, I mean, for example, in the two private universities that I've worked in, the public relations emphasis within mass comm is the most popular among students because it has a direct vocational connection. A lot of students and their parents can say, oh, okay, I understand what a degree in public relations will be. I understand what kind of jobs they can get in public relations. And so these are very popular areas for people to study.
Oh, so parents and students would very much prefer to study courses that after their graduation, they will be most like employed, they will get more employment opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, in Kuwait, like many places around the world, including the United States, the emphasis on education for vocation, that is, getting an education to help you get a job as the primary benefit, is really, I think, one of the dominant ways in which people see higher education. Whereas, I think there's a bit of a drift away from education that's also beneficial for society, that's beneficial in terms of just the education itself, for self-fulfillment, for knowledge, for awareness. So the kind of more career track education is certainly a dominant feature, not just here, in many places around the world, because ultimately, when educators have to fight for funding, they have to, make things run. The things that can promise a better chance of a job are going to be more appealing to students and the parents. Hence, they're going to get more people into those areas. And the more people into those degrees they have, the healthier the university will be. So the kind of business element of how universities operate certainly encourages people to do education that leads primarily to a specific job and not just education for the benefit of education alone.
This is great. Of course, thank you very much indeed, Professor. We're going on a short break. When we come back, the second episode of Global Arena with Professor Fahed Al-Sumait will focus heavily on the researches that he has conducted on issues of democracy and Arab Springs and other issues related to the politics and the media in Middle East. In the Middle Eastern region. So stay tuned and we'll be back very, very soon. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.